Well, good evening. It's so good to be with you tonight. Frank and I look forward to our Wednesday nights together, not just the two of us, but two of us with you. And I know there are people who are not only joining in on the stream, but on the telephone. Stephen Bell told me Mom's online tonight on the telephone. So, Mom, I love you. It's good to, I can't see you, but it's good to know you're there. She called me on Sunday and she's always just so encouraging. Let me know she's proud of me and all that. So I'm grateful to have that kind of mother. She's kind of what we were talking about last week, always that word of encouragement, never the word of criticism, or complaint. That was the distinction made last week, criticism versus complaint.
So be careful what you say tonight.
Be careful.
Mom is listening.
That's right.
Okay.
Also, my lovely wife, Jackie, has a birthday. I won't say which one, but has a birthday tomorrow. So I know she's now embarrassed that I'm telling the whole wide world that her birthday is April the 30th, but it is. And so if you get a chance to wish her a happy birthday, I know that would thrill her. She's very special. And we've talked about the stress of being kind of pinned in together and all that. And you guys just need to pray for Jackie, because I'm not an easy person to be around. I can be very, very intense or very quiet or very serious. I can be all kinds of things. But rarely does anybody describe me as somebody fun to be with. So, especially when you're kind of locked up with me, that's kind of a tough thing. I am so thankful that you make this decision to be with us. I still don't know when we'll be able to all be together again. I know right now Nashville is talking about different phases, small groups, a little bit larger groups, a little bit larger. I know the elders and staff were praying about that and trying to figure out how to do that well, and to be a safe place. So be praying about that. And we're all very, very eager to be together, but we want to make sure that we're doing it at the right time and doing it the right way, so we're not creating problems for people. I do want to mention to you this. Next Wednesday, Frank and I will not be on stage. Larry Souder will be doing Stories of Amazing Grace, but it will be a repeat episode of that. I think it's going to be the last one that he did, which if you didn't get to see, was very positive. You did see, you probably want to watch it again. I know Jackie bought the book and has been reading that and has enjoyed that, but it's a really fascinating story, and Larry, it was obvious he was enjoying that conversation, and so it'll be the first Wednesday night of May, and we'll be running that next week. I think that's all the kind of announcement stuff we have. So, as you know, Frank and I are kind of meandering through various topics related to the question of suffering and the challenges that presents. And so we try to somehow connect it with what we did on Sunday, but kind of this ongoing dialogue on, Frank has been talking to us some the last few weeks about parents with children, and I don't think it's just about parents with children. I think that's kind of the focus. But what I found is a lot of things that you're talking about as far as parents with children, it's not very hard to take some of those ideas and look at it on a more general level as far as being with people who are dealing with anxiety, fear, worry. And so we're going to try to continue that conversation tonight. Now, this past Sunday, we looked at Job chapter 1 and began our discussion of Job. We'll probably spend about 4 or 5 weeks in all on the book of Job. So it's a long book, fascinating book. And if you've not read it, I would encourage you to do that. It's one of the great books of the Bible, but not just of the Bible, of Western literature, as far as dealing with the whole problem of suffering and God. And I find every time I start to work with it, I am confronted with new ideas, and never the final answer, but some important insights. So I hope you'll be taking some time to read through that, and not just depending on me, but that you'll spend time in your morning reading or evening readings and kind of explore the book of Job together with me. But Frank, we talked about chapter 1 on Sunday. Did you have any thoughts or reflections about Job or the story of Job or what role it's played? Because next week we'll be with Larry. The week after that, I may be interviewing Martell. She's got a book that's kind of, I think, a diary kind of that you work through on some of the issues that we're talking about. And I think coming up pretty soon, I might be interviewing her. So just so we have an opportunity, do you have any thoughts about the book of Job? And can you share that with us?
It would be just the entire concept of spiritual warfare, that things are happening behind the scenes in heaven that we don't know about, we can't know about. I mean, we're limited to our earthly perspective, and we don't know why things happen. Like I had a conversation today with someone who lost a spouse, and their big question is why? And we don't have the ultimate answers on that, and that's true with whatever issue it is. We see something happening as bad, like in Job's suffering, but God had a greater purpose in mind. Mm-hmm. So there's this, I'm sure you're going to develop this on Sunday mornings, but it's the ongoing Satan versus God's people that's happening right now that's invisible to us. Mm-hmm. That's very dramatic that we usually don't think about.
I think you're right. And one of the things that when you mentioned this on Sunday, but you might not remember, one of the things that you as a reader have with the book of Job is at least some insight into what's going on. Job never is given that insight on these conversations between the Satan or the accuser and God and what's going on. That's never given to him. So as a reader, you had that. Now, sometimes even having that creates a bit of a struggle, kind of go, so what is that? How's that going? But still, that's information that he does not have, and I think you're right. There are a lot of things that happen, and we don't know the why or the timing or those kinds of things.
And sometimes I've thought, what if we did not have those first 2 chapters in Job, and we just got thrown into the story, and we did not know that there was a bigger purpose being served by that. I mean, it helps in that introduction. We know this on the front end. He had no clue, and he was just trying to figure it out. And, of course, the big thing was he never got a full answer from God. And I think that's applicable to us. Can we ever figure out why, like this person died or this tragedy happened? No. I mean, and that's our natural inclination, is to try to figure it out.
Why.
The why. But really, the message in Scripture is always just live well, no matter what's happening. And you may not be able to figure it out, and it's okay.
Yeah, and one of the things that I came across in Timothy Keller, but 2 or 3 other sources, so it wasn't just Keller, but certainly wasn't original with me, but this whole notion of my relationship with God, am I approaching as if it were a contract, that if I do this, God should do this for me.
That he owes me.
That he owes me, or is it a covenant where God is committed to me, but I'm committed to him, and I'm not the one in charge or in control of, or it's really not my role to put God on trial as if I could. And even that comes up later in Job. He would like to have a trial with God, but when he finally is face-to-face with God, he's kind of going, just need to put my hands on my mouth.
And I think that would be true with us. I mean, someday when we're with the Lord, whenever that time is, I mean, all of this questioning that we have now will probably just disappear. We'll just be lost in the wonder of being in God's presence and not trying to figure out anything anymore.
Yeah, I often have people say to me, well, I've got so many questions for God.
But will we?
But my question is, will we? And my question is this, would we still be able to understand it? We kind of think that I would have the intellectual capacity that I'll be godlike. And I don't think we're going to be God. I think we're going to be raised people. But Jesus, even in his lifetime, goes, there's some things I don't know that the Father knows. There's some things not been revealed to me. And that's a curious thing, is that sometimes maybe what we do all of our existence is accept the fact that God is God, and I'm not. And it's not my role to be in charge of God. It's his role to be the sovereign of my life and to have this relationship with him that says, like Job will say later, even though he slay me, I will trust him. That's coming up in Job 13, I think.
It must be our human nature to want to figure out the why of everything. It's deep in us.
Starts early.
Yes, it starts
Kids,
early
why,
in childhood.
Daddy?
Yes, in childhood it starts. Yeah.
It does. And one of the things that you may find, at least I do, is when my children were very young, they'd ask me why questions. And very often what I would do is we give them some degree of answer that, number one, they didn't find satisfying, but also that really wasn't adequate because they were not developed enough to understand things. But still, it was offered to them up to a point, but still very often they would press it more and go, but why? Because what they wanted to do was to understand it fully. And even some of the questions they were asking me, I still don't understand. I still am a bit puzzled about.
It seems to me that the more mature we become in our Christian faith, the why part doesn't go away.
No.
But we have had enough perspective to develop over the years that, okay, so this did not work out for me in the past. I didn't get this job. Or this didn't happen. But it's okay because now I can see the purpose for it later on. And maybe we won't even see the purpose until heaven someday. We may not ever see the earthly purpose.
Yeah.
But it's just the trust in God. That's the huge theme all throughout the Old and New Testament. Trust means you don't see, and that's why you're trusting.
Yeah.
And so we learn to live with trust, and we can't figure it out, and it's okay.
Yeah. And one of the things that's coming up, since we won't have a chance to talk for the next couple of weeks, one of the things that is coming up is you find Job's friends in these dialogues that are coming, they have certain religious slogans that have some truth to them, but they kind of apply them to Job, and instead of them being comforters, it's creating all kinds of anxiety and pushback from him and accusations on their part. And what you find when you get to the end is God's going, Job, he's got some questions about Job, but he basically says, you maintain your integrity, but he goes, you need to offer sacrifice for them because what they were doing was not fair. So if you, in your counseling background, do you ever find that sometimes religious people who are well-intentioned, because I think his friends were well-intentioned, but sometimes they're offering kind of counsel and advice that's based on a verse of the Bible. Do you ever find that becoming a problem that you're just kind of scratching your head and going, well, I understand what they were trying to say, but have you had that kind of experience with people?
It comes up often about whether we deserve help or not. I was in a conversation with someone today about the homeless population, and is it up to us to figure out whether they deserve help or not? Here's a person who's just needy. Sometimes we get kind of hung up on all of that, and that's not what we need to be doing. We're just there. God helps us at our worst moments. We're to help other people at their worst moments. The whole judgmental factor is there sometimes, which is not, and that's what people don't like and find attractive about Christianity, if they think that we're judging them somehow for their behavior. And what I will tell people is, I'm not judging. I really care for you. Bring all your sins. I'm bringing all of mine. We care for people, and we're not judging. God does have a standard for how we're to live our life, and this is the standard, but we care for you regardless of how you're living right now. We're not judging.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I think about, too, with these kind of slogans that people, whether they get out of Scripture or borrow from other places, and you probably have seen it, too, because you've been around death a lot. But I've seen people, like when a child dies, somebody say things like, well, God just needed another angel.
One of the worst possible things to say.
But they say it.
Yes.
And they think that's going to be a comfort.
Yeah.
Or, go ahead, you were going to say something.
Because is that the type of God we want to worship, who will pluck a child from the earth because I need him in heaven somehow? And of course, humans don't become angels anyway.
Right.
There's so much wrong with all of that. But yeah. I know it's meant to be comforting.
But it's not.
It's the opposite of comforting, I think.
So I remember, so I'll share a story, and then we'll turn to kind of some of your thoughts about dealing with anxiety and depression. So when I first started encouragement ministry, so this is back in the late 80s, right around 1990, there was a Lipscomb baseball player, Scott Shannon, who he was a great player and pitcher and had a potential to play professional baseball, but his senior year, the speed dropped off of his fastball. He was a left-handed pitcher, great guy. And what happened was he had cancer. And I was asked to go by to see him at Vanderbilt Hospital. I went by to see him almost every day and got very deeply involved with him and his family. But he finally died. So a very young man died. So it was just a lot of Lipscomb students, very close. He had this kind of big personality, very loved. He was from Lexington, Kentucky. His family's part of a really big church there. And so I was asked to be part of the funeral. And so the minister of this really big church, it wasn't a Church of Christ, but it was a really big church, so he was a very popular speaker. So I'm sitting on stage kind of like this, and so they had a speaker stand out there, and so this minister gets up and he talks about how Scott was a great pitcher, but he'd never pitched a no-hitter, and that now he's in heaven pitching no-hitters. And in my mind, I'm sitting on stage in my mind the whole time, I'm going, so who's he pitching against? The team from hell? And then how satisfying would that be? But once again, this preacher thought that would be a great comfort. But here's the P.S. on that. About 2 years later, this minister's daughter, who was an athlete, was killed in a van accident. The college team was returning back from. And so he went through the loss of his child, and he came over to talk to Scott's mother, and he apologized to her. He said, when I said this a few years ago, I thought this would be comforting. And he says, I need you to forgive me because I know that what I said brought no comfort to you. And he says, I'm so sorry, which to me was huge.
Which brings up in my mind how hard it is to say something comforting. We think we're saying something profound, and it misses the mark.
It does.
And that's why, again, in the story, the friend that can be the most comforting at times is just the one who's there and who's listening and caring, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
Not trying to make some type of mark with what you say.
Make it all work out okay, yeah.
Right. Pitching no-hitters in heaven.
Oh, boy, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Frank. Anything else on Job that you thought about?
No, that's the main thing. It's just that really Satan is always after us. And it's not just what's happening here on earth, it's what's happening in heaven that's affecting us.
Yeah.
And that sobers me when I think about that he's after you, after all of us right now.
Yeah, and one of the things I think when I read in Job, and it'll come out a little bit more in this next week's sermon, but there are a lot of people who are pretty big on God as long as God is prospering them and doing good things. But that's that idea of the contract. But when that seems to go in a different direction, where there's this unexpected loss, suffer, all these kind of things turning upside down, some people pretty quickly turn against God and go, well, why is he doing this to me? And once again, it's that why question. But it's that type of idea that, well, I've done my part, and now God is supposed to do his part. And if we're not careful, that becomes, it's the way a lot of people do marriage nowadays. They make this promise, you stand before somebody, you make the promise for better or for worse. But when it starts getting worse, there are a lot of people nowadays who start figuring out, what's my exit strategy on this?
Right. No matter what we say in the wedding vows, if it becomes too bad, off we go.
So we want more like a contract.
Sadly. I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're saying before that reminds me of a story of one of the young ladies that I talked with who rejected God for a period of time because her grandfather passed away, and he was an elderly man. But she so much did not want him to die before Christmas. I may have told you this story before. Nobody connected to Madison, but it's really one of my favorite people in life, was telling me this story about herself. And she just had so much trouble with, she was praying, God, please don't let my grandfather die before Christmas. I don't want them to die at all, but not before Christmas. It would ruin the holidays. And well, she was a teenager, and I know that sounds selfish.
I understand.
But I mean, it was a genuine prayer on
Yes.
her part, and she pleaded with God, and guess what? He died before Christmas. And she said, that so turned me against God, and I don't understand. Why didn't he let my grandfather live? You know, that's what I'm praying for with all of my heart.
Yeah.
And so that's what hung her up. Now, years have passed, and she has more perspective on it now, but I think she still struggles with it, like the big why question.
Yeah.
I don't have any answer. Why didn't he? I don't know. I mean, with the trust in God factor, it's, well, I trust that God still had a good purpose in his timing. God's timing is what knocks us down a lot, because we're expecting things to happen on our timetable. Makes sense to us, but it's not God's timetable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Frank, thank you. But I know you have some other things that you want. I'm just kind of keeping my eye on the clock here. So I know you had some other things that you want to talk about as far as with people dealing with anxiety and depression and kind of obsessive worries, especially with parents dealing with children. So what other words of wisdom do you have tonight?
I found something in the newspaper from a UT professor, and I thought this was good. She mainly talking about what parents need to do to help young people right now during this time. And it was 3 things. It was the 3 R's, not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but it was reassurance, routine, and regulation. And it made sense to me, just the reassurance that it will all be well eventually. We don't know what the new normal is going to be, but it still will be temporary, and we will work it out, and it will be okay. We will figure it out together as a family, the reassurance. And then the routine. Make sure you have a routine in your family, and it's not just total chaos right now that people don't have schedules. Like I know our son, he's doing the homeschooling part for our grandchildren right now, and they always have class starting at 9 o'clock in the mornings after he fixes breakfast. Natalie goes off to do her doctoring as a surgeon, and so he takes care of the children in the mornings. And so they start school at 9. It's a regular routine, and they just expect that. Makes sense. And just the regulation, and what this UT professor is talking about is parents regulating their own emotions here and taking care of themselves and being particularly compassionate with their child during this hard time. It's not normal at all. So take care of yourself and be compassionate with your child. And the professor was saying, just focus on, we're just surviving right now. We're not thriving. Can't say we're thriving. So be compassionate. Your child may not be thriving. We're not thriving. We're just trying to figure it out as we go. So I like that idea of just everybody taking care of themselves and one another right now. And it seems to me that people are being especially nice to one another. I mean, I've noticed that in traffic, and when you do go to the store, have to be out somewhere, it seems like people want to be kind to one another. So it's just modeling that for your child, being compassionate, and just going with these 3 R's here made sense to me.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially I think the routine part is just really big. Because we take for granted kind of the routines of normal life, and when you suddenly put into abnormal life and those routines are taken away, it takes a really big toll. And so I think the idea of starting at 9 o'clock, the classes, all that, I think getting up at a certain time, doing those kind of things that you do, even small things like making up a bed. Now, I usually get up before Jackie, so the making the bed is not my duty because she gets up after me, so I'm pretty glad about that. But I still think it's those kind of those rituals that are really more important than most of us realize.
Yes, the rituals, and that's another thing that the experts are saying.
R.
Yeah, well, how about that? Very good, Dr. Corley.
R's.
Okay. The 4th R there. And yes, it's just having these, special routines and rituals that we keep. And whether it's birthdays or holidays, we still want to celebrate in ways that we can. And I think that's what's throwing a lot of people overboard right now. They've lost their routine. So they need to establish another routine. But yes, we need that for our own sanity, I think.
Yeah, and I'm thinking a lot of our, we have a number of seniors this year at Madison, and so I just really hate it for them that they're, I think some of the graduation have been rescheduled for midsummer, but it's really thrown off that, or like athletes who had the spring athletics. So we have a number of students that were involved in either track or baseball or soccer, some form. And once again, to lose that, you got to find something else to kind of keep you focused. Otherwise, you can focus on that which is lost. And I think it's fine to have that sense of loss and grief about that, but having some other thing that helps you at least refocus and have that sense of purpose is important if you can.
And I think that's where parents help by being role models, by staying positive. I was reading something, be the parent, be the person you want your child to be someday when it comes to character. Not necessarily profession or anything like that, but you model optimism. That's what you want your child to be. About the modeling optimism, it reminds me, this is where, this is not me in the best light here. But
I like this. Here we go.
Okay, but if I tell a story like that, you're going to have to tell a story.
All right.
Okay. All right, so years ago, there was a very optimistic parent at the church that we attended. It wasn't here at Madison. It was before Madison. And so we had a youth group over to her house, and they had white carpeting, beautiful white carpeting.
Oh, my.
Okay, you can see where I'm going with this maybe. And so the youth group is in there, and somebody knocks over a soft drink on the white carpeting. And the lady, just as optimistic as she can be, she bounds up with a smile and gets a towel and starts cleaning and never says a word of scolding or anything like that. And when everyone is leaving, she's saying, "Thank you for coming to my house." And there's no negativity. There's nothing like that. So guess who knocked over the drink? It was me. And I never told her. I just pretended, somebody, that was me that knocked over the drink. But what stuck out with me was her optimism. She was modeling that, and it wouldn't surprise me if her children end up like that too. Like little things did not throw her in life. So yay for her. And I want to be like that. I don't want to be a scolder or a Scrooge or someone like that. I want to portray that type of spirit.
Yeah, I don't see you as a scolder.
No. I don't think I'd be a scolder.
Do you think you could have been positive like her? God, that's no big deal. I would have had a hard time with
I think
that.
I could have done it publicly. I don't know what I'd be thinking on the inside about that or not.
And we don't know what you said to her husband after all this is over.
Yeah, but I think that was just her, though. That's what she was known for.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And, one more thing, thinking about just being positive, and a lot of the research out there, applicable to marriages, applicable to raising children, they're saying make sure that your interactions are 5-to-1 positive over negative. Mm-hmm. And if you ever do get to a point of, we said last week, not criticizing, but complaining, can you look back and see 5 positives that you've said or interactions before you ever get to that negative? I'm afraid in a lot of families that's kind of flipped.
Yeah.
And it becomes more of a negative interaction style. But this comes from the Gottmans, who you may know that name.
Yeah,
They're
John
clinical.
Gottman.
Yes, John Gottman and his wife. They're clinical psychologists who really started studying marriages that said you had to have this 5-to-1 ratio, or else that's the road to divorce. That's one of the roads to divorce. But saying it's also applicable to parents and children, 5-to-1 ratio. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying you have to keep that in mind all the time and start counting all of that, but it's just an overall
awareness.
Yes, an awareness of try to keep it positive and try to say yes to your children as much as you can. There are times to say no, but the recommendation is try to say yes, even if it's a wacky idea. Even if no one is going to get hurt and it's not going to be like throw the family over somehow. I mean, just try to say yes. And I was thinking of a childhood incident, but then you've got to share one too. But okay, around Easter time, our mother would let us go dig holes all over the backyard to try to trap the Easter rabbit. We could dig holes all over the yard, the backyard, couldn't be the front yard. As many, and put carrots in there and try to come up with traps to catch the Easter rabbit.
Wow.
She said yes to that. And so, I mean, that's a sweet memory that I have. We never caught him.
Never caught him.
But we would write letters to the Easter rabbit, and he would write us back.
Oh.
And always sign with the paw print.
Oh,
So, yes, the
clever.
Easter rabbit was big in our house, but we never caught him.
never caught him.
But what impressed me was she would say yes, and that's wacky, but it made for a good life.
Yeah.
So when I go home, no, Easter's past now. We didn't catch him, so.
So did David ever ask you some strange, bizarre thing that you had to really stress to say yes to him?
I think we leaned in the direction of saying yes. I can't remember anything bizarre particularly. Okay, so now I've shared. So do you have a story where either your mom and dad said yes to something or no to something?
Well, mom was always very affirming. I don't know really story about that, but mom was always very affirming. I mean, if she saw you have an interest in something, she wanted to support you in that, help you get that organized and think about that. But there's nothing that really stands in my mind. Last week I hinted at a story where of all the times she punished me, there's only one. See, I thought last week when I asked me what that story was.
Well, you can share it now.
Oh, okay. So there's only one time. My mother's listening now, so she may be going, why is he telling this? But so I'm not sure how old I was, but all three of my sisters were present at this. So we're all 2 years apart. So Donna's 2 years older, on down to Jan, my youngest, and Karen is right there in the middle. And so we were at the old Cooper and Martin store, which was on Gallatin Road, close to Lytton High School. We were there. Mom had gone inside. And back then, so this is going to seem really strange. If you got children today and all that, this is going to sound strange. But back then, number one, seatbelts were not a big thing, right?
Right.
And basically, if the brakes had to be put on, this was the seatbelt. My mother's arm would come across.
Remember those days?
Yeah, so you had that. But also, it was a different world. So I grew up in a world where you didn't lock doors. Yeah. We didn't lock doors at night. We'd leave the house not locking doors. And I mean, it's hard to think about that. But also, it was in the summertime, and we had the windows rolled down, but she'd gone into Cooper Martin to do some shopping and let the four of us as kids in the car, okay? Mm-hmm. So you would no longer do that either, right? But still. Yeah. So the Krispy Kreme donut man pulls up, and my sisters start going, Rusty, go see if he'll give us some donuts. Come on. So it's that kind of dare. And so, yeah, I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I went over to him. I go, my sister, we're over in the car, and do you have any donuts? He said, well, sure. So he gave us a box of donuts. So we're sitting in the car. I didn't steal the donuts or anything like that.
I thought you would steal them, but no, you didn't steal them.
We're sitting in the car, and we're all eating donuts. You got all this stuff all over you. And Mother comes out, and she is horrified. Oh. I don't know if she thought that we had stolen them, or, I mean, we told her that we asked him. But I think she was just mortified that her children would ask somebody and not pay for something. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but anyway, she goes, who did this? And all three of my sisters at the same time go, Rusty did it. So when I got home, I got spanked.
Oh.
My sisters, who were encouraging me to get the donuts, they didn't get spanked. They were actually standing at the door. So I walked out of the bathroom. So mom and dad, my bedroom was here, and they had their bathroom, and their bedroom was over here. And so when I walked out, my sisters all three laughing at me. My mom had caught them. She probably would have done something about that. But it took years before she admitted that really was probably the wrong judgment, that I had not done, I had not misobeyed a rule, anything like that, and had been encouraged by my sister. So if there's going to be the wrath of Pat, it probably should have been widespread instead of just the singling out. But so that's not the story about the kind of crazy yes of things. And really, in my family, there was not many crazy yeses. You had to kind of make your case. But if you made your case, it was not hard to get approval. And I think even that was good practice, because I think one of the things that when you are kind of enter into the larger world of responsible adults, if your thinking is too crazy, a lot of times people just go, "What are you thinking about?" So I was learning probably pretty early that you have to have good reasons for the thing you're asking, and how to kind of prepare your case for, this is what I'd like to do. But it made me a little bit overly obsessive about giving reasons.
Well, I know that you think things through very thoroughly.
Yeah.
You come up with reasons and you like to explain.
But it can get obsessive. It can wear you out, right,
Well,
Frank? Yes, you
I'm
know
not
it
saying
can.
that.
You have said it. Just in private.
Well,
so
okay. Well,
it's all
yes,
good.
you like to think things through, then
Yeah.
explain it very thoroughly.
Yeah,
And so that maybe goes back to childhood.
probably so.
Okay.
So do you have some other thoughts? I see you got yellow paper.
Oh,
and
yeah.
notes.
Okay. And I don't know if I've talked about this, but I think this can be a life changer for
Okay.
parents. I mean, it's what you do at meal times. It's this, I won't call it a game, but it can be fun. It's let's talk about our day, what made me mad, sad, and glad, with everybody participating in that. And it opens up the communication, and you start at little with children, and then, talk about routines. They start, oh, we're going to talk about this. And I don't think we implemented that with our son. I think I just learned this little format, a few years ago. But I thought, man, this is so good for families. Instead of just eating in silence or watching TV or looking at your phones, you talk about mad, sad, glad with everybody participating. And you just do that. And it gets you talking about your emotions, for one thing, and it gives parents a clue of what's happening with their children. Start it early. Maybe you can implement with teenagers. I don't know, but I think starting earlier would be better. And a variation on that one is just, okay, everybody, not just Thanksgiving time, but what are 5 things that happened today that made you happy, that were a blessing to you, or that you're grateful for, with everybody participating. It's just using mealtime well, besides just eating, but like kind of bonding in the family. And it's building that optimistic spirit. You're not talking about the 5 worst things that happened, but 5 blessings of today.
I like that.
Yeah.
So, Frank, what things made you mad, sad, or glad today?
Okay.
And then I'll share. Let you go first.
Well, let's alternate. I can't come up with all at one time.
Okay.
Okay, something that made me glad. I've decided not to try to overdo it and just be good to myself. And there's always a lot of things I need to do every day when it comes, to school responsibilities and to church responsibilities. But I'm trying to minimize that, because I think I can get obsessive too in trying to do too much. But I had a note in the mail from one of our widows here at Madison, and it was just so nice. And she said that she's trying to write 20 people every week from Madison. And so I'd say, okay, I'm just going to call her. So I did, and we had such a pleasant conversation. She's not someone that I would usually, unless I just happen to see her as I walk down the aisle, I think she sits over there, but I typically don't talk to. But I just picked up the phone and, okay, I'll call her and say thank you, and that led to some other good conversations. So it's just, okay, it made me happy, glad to get to know somebody on a deeper level today.
Yeah.
Okay, your turn.
Well, I had a conversation this afternoon. I called Buddy Reagan, and so Frank and I, to kind of remind us to keep looking at the camera, we have Buddy Norma's picture just underneath the camera.
They are right there.
It's lighted.
Yeah.
You can't see it, but it's right there.
Yeah.
But I had just one of these great conversations with Buddy. We talked about things. I got all choked up, but it was. Sometimes you have this joyfulness, and part of what we were reflecting on was when I came back to Madison 6 years ago. So my reason for coming to Madison was not to work, but was to teach. I wasn't paid, and it was Nyla's cancer, so something bad. But that was what was behind the invitation. But one of the wonderful things was I got to know Buddy Reagan again. I'd met him before, but that began a conversation. And then something else that bad was early this year was the first time he had to be in the hospital. But the good thing was that was before COVID had set in. You could still have visitors. We began to have great conversations. So we had a friendship. It was always encouraging, just Buddy. But then those visits, we had wonderful conversations, time of prayer, and it was mutual. It wasn't just me toward him, but back and forth. And so, there are those kinds of conversations that create that sense of deep gratitude for this astonishing, extraordinary gift. And it wasn't just about the friendship with Buddy, but for me, it was about this being brought back to Madison at an unexpected time in my life, and just the profound difference that has made the last 6 years of my life. It's been, I don't know if I would say it's the best years of my life, but it certainly competes with any other segment of my life that were really good years in the sense of better than I could have ever anticipated or hoped for, especially when you get my age and you kind of reach retirement years, to be actually called into a new challenge. So that's been something that made me glad. So what about mad? Was anything made you mad today?
Can't think of anything mad. I can think of something sad.
What's sad?
I mean, talking to another widow, I'm going to be doing a graveside service tomorrow, and just talking to Jan about the loss of Ron and her sadness, and of course everyone's sadness about that.
Yeah.
And just hearing a little bit more about their lives, married 52 years, and the suddenness of the loss. Of course, that's going to make you sad, but I mean, you need to talk about that too. I mean, that's part of life. And then I had another glad thing. I mean, on a contrasting note, I talked to a young lady. I'm going to be doing conducting a wedding on Saturday night for a young lady where it's just going to be in the backyard, just family, less than 10 people, just kind of getting to share her excitement. So from going from a funeral to a wedding, and someone asked me today, how's your day been? Maybe that was you. And I said, well, it's been good and bad. I mean, it's always a mixture. Mm-hmm. You hear sad stories and you hear good stories. Yeah. But that's how our lives are.
Yeah. Ron's death, that was one of those sad moments of the week, not today, but
yes.
Of the week. I talked to Jan, and the shock of it all. That's, a lot of deaths, you kind of see it coming.
Right.
You realize time is short. But you had these deaths be there that kind of sudden, whether it was a heart attack or exactly what it was, we're not quite sure, but that happened. Or like when I took call at Vanderbilt for years, every other weekend, and there'd be these terrible accidents that would happen. So you get called at 2 o'clock in the morning to come in to be with the family. And it just was that kind of no warning, and suddenly you're thinking everything is just fine, and suddenly it's kind of like you're right here, everything's just fine, and then bam, you go off the edge, and it's just so dramatic, and it's just, but yeah, that's been a sadness this week. As the being mad arose in me, I dealt with it, which was good. But my daughter Barbara had a birthday last week, and her husband Shetel had a birthday on Monday. So they live in Oslo, Norway. so I needed to deposit a check into her checking account. But banks make you go through drive-throughs, right? And maybe you've had this experience, whether it be a supermarket, whatever. Have you ever picked the wrong line?
Yes.
And so I pulled up and I saw a car and I saw the canister come down, the clear thing. I go, oh, he's about to pull off. So I pulled in behind him. About the time I did, somebody pulled in behind me. Well, the next thing I know, he's sending the canister back.
Oh, he's just
Okay?
beginning it, yes.
He's sending the canister back. And I could tell he was getting frustrated because 10 minutes later, whoever it was back there not sending the canister back to him, and he's pushing the button and all that kind of stuff. And I'm watching car after car after car go through the other two places. And I'm having to somehow calm myself. It kind of goes back to that notion of regulation of your emotion. So, you know, you're in this moment, and Gottman talks about the idea of getting flooded. There are things that flood you with the emotion. And then the question is, what do I do with it? Do I lean into it and let it rip? Do I honk my horn at him? Do I go after the woman who comes on the little screen and I can't even understand what she's saying and all that kind of stuff? Or do I just kind of let that go past that and be thankful that I finally was able to deposit the check and all that? And so I turned in that direction. But for the first few minutes, in all honesty, the thoughts that were going through my head were not happy thoughts.
Mad.
They were mad thoughts, like,
Yeah.
why did I get in this line?
Right.
And I'm so upset. What's wrong with, what were they doing in there?
Yeah.
And it just, I think driving, it's been better in Nashville. And, you know, you said you think people have been nicer, but I think one thing that makes people a little bit nicer in Nashville traffic right now is there's almost no traffic. There's so few people out. You can go out almost any time of the day and navigate anywhere you want to, and that puts us in a better mood. But when you get these long lines in Nashville, when it goes back to full normal speed, it becomes a lot easier to get frustrated with people who are not stopping the way they should or all that kind of stuff.
It's all those little moments, like what you're talking
All
about,
those
where the
little
rubber meets the road, that
Yeah,
will show
man.
what your true character is going to be. Are you going to be peaceful? Are you going to be angry?
Yeah. And Jesus says, so if somebody slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek. But I find, for me, if I'm not careful, we have a roundabout now where we are, and there are people who take that as just gun it on through and expect everybody else to yield. They think yield is for everybody else, but not for them. And so it's just one of those things that kind of you have to keep going. So that's much easier to deal with than being slapped. And so it's this kind of good practice of, okay, either I take this personally or I just let this, I'd much rather be something else, but somehow regulate that response.
And going full circle, I think that's a part of the spiritual warfare
I do too.
that we deal with. I mean, to us, it's just a simple, okay, I get stuck in a bank line. Well, what if there are bigger purposes behind all of that we really can't see? You know, how are we going to respond?
And I kept telling myself, you need to be patient. Job was patient. You can be patient with this. That was nothing compared to what's going on in the book of Job. Yeah. Well, Frank, I'm looking at the clock, and our time is just swept away.
Yep.
So we'll talk about some more things at another time in the future, but I appreciate so much. So next week, we've got Larry Souder's Stories of Amazing Grace. So I hope you'll plan to tune in on that and invite some other people to be a part of that. I don't know about you, but I've had people write notes or emails, or like Carol Bellis has texted, I think both of us. But we both appreciate, some of you have been so encouraging about Wednesday night and all this. And I think you can tell we enjoy being with each other, but especially being with you. And so our prayer is that somehow God can use these conversations to be an encouragement to you. And if you have any kind of question that you would like for us to talk about at some point, or something you think we need to be thinking about, because we both recognize we have our limits. And it's good to recognize that
I think
about
I
ourselves.
passed mine a while ago anyway, so yeah, okay.
So Frank, part of our tradition is, because traditions and ritual are good, but part of our tradition is you're closing us out with prayer. So would you do that for us tonight?
Be happy to. Father in heaven, we very humbly approach you, very thankfully approach you that you take care of us in our life, even during the times that we don't understand, like the moment we're living in right now. We just know that you are there, and what's important is how we respond to you in our life, and help us to respond well. Father, we pray for all of those that have been watching and listening, and just pray your blessings for them. We want to be close to you. We pray for this church family that you'll keep us close and bring us back even stronger someday. We ask this through our Savior. Amen.
Amen. So as we get ready to sign off, I do want to share that blessing that comes from the book of Numbers. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. That's a blessing we all need right now, because if you're like me, this long period of time, it can rob our peace. And so we need God to be blessing us and helping us to know how to live this life, this good life with him. Hope you have a great evening, and look forward to seeing you next week.